The security guard didn't even let me reach the front desk. I had barely stepped through the glass doors when he held out his arm. "Sir, visitors need approval before entering." I smiled politely. "I know." I reached into my jacket pocket and handed him the visitor pass I had received over the phone the day before. He glanced at it for less than a second. Then he looked me up and down. The pass never made it back into my hand. "I'm going to ask you to wait outside." For a moment, I thought he was joking. "I'm here to visit someone." "I understand." His tone remained professional. "But you'll need to wait." Behind him, I could see the lobby. Soft piano music floated through the building. Fresh flowers stood on polished marble tables. Families were arriving with gift bags and balloons. One elderly couple sat near the fireplace drinking tea while a nurse laughed at something the old man had said. Everything about the place felt peaceful. Until I walked in. I looked down at myself. My brown work boots still had dust on them. My denim jacket smelled faintly of engine oil. I'd spent the entire morning repairing an old tractor for a widow who couldn't afford to replace it. There hadn't been enough time to drive home and change. Jack wouldn't have cared. He never cared about things like that. "You can call him," I said. "Tell Mr. Harrison that Thomas Reed is here." The guard hesitated. "I'll see what I can do." He disappeared behind the reception desk. I waited. 5 minutes passed. People continued walking by, pretending not to stare. A little boy tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, why isn't that man allowed inside?" She quietly pulled him away. Then I heard heels clicking across the marble floor. A woman in an expensive navy suit approached with practiced confidence. Her name tag read, Karen Mitchell, Executive Director. She offered the kind of smile people learn in management seminars. "Good afternoon." "Afternoon. I'm Karen Mitchell." I gathered. She folded her hands. "My staff tells me you're here to visit Mr. Jack Harrison." "That's right. I'm afraid today won't be possible." I frowned. "Why not?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her eyes drifted toward my jacket, then my boots, then the grease stains on my sleeves. Finally, she smiled again. "Our residents deserve a calm, comfortable environment." I wasn't following. "I came to see my best friend. I'm sure your intentions are good." She lowered her voice. "But appearances matter." For a second, I simply stared at her. "I'm sorry. We have families touring the facility today." She nodded toward the lobby. "Some of our residents become anxious when unexpected individuals enter the building." Unexpected individuals. That was a polite way of saying exactly what she thought I was. "I have a visitor pass." "Yes. But I don't think today is the right day." I felt something tighten in my chest. I drove nearly 3 hours to get here. "I'm sorry." Her expression never changed. "I'll have someone escort you back outside." The security guard stepped beside me. Not aggressively. Just close enough to make it clear the conversation was over. Several people in the lobby had stopped pretending not to watch. One elderly woman whispered something to her daughter. A man in a tailored suit shook his head. Someone else quietly laughed. I hadn't been laughed at in years. Not since high school. Funny how quickly old feelings return. I looked back at the director. "Do you know who Jack Harrison is?" She smiled. "Of course. Then you probably know he asked me to come." "I'm afraid Mr. Harrison isn't receiving visitors at the moment." I knew that wasn't true. Jack had called me himself the previous evening. His speech was slower after the stroke, but I could still hear the excitement in his voice. "Tom, don't be late." Those 4 words had taken him almost 20 seconds to say. I wasn't about to believe he'd suddenly changed his mind. "You never called him." The director's smile faded. "I don't appreciate accusations. And I don't appreciate being treated like a criminal because my jacket has grease on it." The lobby fell silent. For a second, I thought she might finally listen. Instead, she took one small step toward me. "Sir." Her voice became colder. "If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have security remove you." I looked around one last time. Nobody said a word. Not the receptionist. Not the visitors. Not the families. Everyone simply watched. I slowly nodded. "All right." I reached for my old canvas bag, turned around, and walked back through the same glass doors I'd entered less than 10 minutes earlier. Outside, the afternoon sun felt strangely warm. Across the street stood a wooden bench beneath a maple tree. I sat down. For a long time, I just stared at the nursing home's entrance. Then I opened my bag. Inside was a small paper sack. Jack's favorite apple fritters. Still warm. I'd stopped at the same bakery we'd visited every Sunday for almost 40 years. Under the bag was something else. An old, faded photograph. 2 young firefighters stood shoulder to shoulder in front of a fire engine. One of them had a thick mustache. The other had more hair than sense. Both were covered in soot. Both were grinning like idiots. On the back, written in Jack's handwriting, were 6 simple words. "Brothers aren't always born. Sometimes they're chosen." I smiled despite everything. Then I looked back at the front entrance. I had no idea that, inside that building, Jack had already begun asking the nurses the same question for the 5th time. "Has Tom arrived yet?" I must have sat on that bench for 20 minutes. Maybe longer. At my age, time has a strange way of slowing down when you're hurting. The apple fritters were still warm. I almost laughed. Jack had spent 40 years pretending he only came to that little bakery because I liked it. The truth was, he couldn't resist their cinnamon glaze. Every Sunday, he'd buy 2. One for himself. One, just in case. We both knew there was never going to be a just in case. He always ate both. I smiled at the memory. Then the smile disappeared. What if I never saw him again? The doctors had warned me after his stroke that every visit mattered. His memory wasn't fading, but his body was betraying him. Some days he spoke almost normally. Other days he struggled to finish a sentence. I had promised him I'd keep showing up, no matter what. That promise suddenly felt impossible to keep. Jack and I met in the fire academy in the spring of 1976. He was loud. I was quiet. He talked to everyone. I usually stayed in the background. No one expected us to become friends. Especially not brothers. But something happened during our 3rd week of training. A warehouse caught fire on the edge of town. It wasn't part of the academy. Real firefighters were already responding. Our instructors volunteered to help, and a few of us trainees went along. We were supposed to stay outside the safety perimeter. Instead, I saw a little girl standing on the 2nd floor of the building. Before I had time to think, I ran inside. It was the stupidest decision I'd ever made, and it almost became my last. Part of the roof collapsed behind me. Smoke swallowed the staircase. I couldn't find my way out. The next thing I remember was someone grabbing the back of my turnout coat. It was Jack. He could have waited for professional crews. Instead, he came after me. The 3 of us barely made it outside before the 2nd floor gave way. Later that night, after the paramedics finished checking us over, he punched me in the shoulder. "You ever do something that dumb again," he said, "I'm letting you burn." Then he handed me a cup of terrible vending machine coffee. That was his version of saying he cared. From that day on, we were inseparable. For almost 40 years we worked the same shifts. We saw apartment fires, highway pileups, factory explosions, and more tragedy than anyone should ever have to remember. Some memories stayed with us. Others we agreed to leave behind. Whenever one of us started carrying too much, the other somehow knew. We never had to ask. That's what real friendship looks like. People always assumed Jack became wealthy because he was lucky. They were wrong. After retiring from the fire department, he started a small construction company with 1 pickup truck and 2 employees. He worked harder than anyone I'd ever known. Within 20 years, it had grown into one of the largest commercial builders in the county. Meanwhile, I opened a repair shop. Mostly tractors, old trucks, farm equipment. Nothing glamorous. I never wanted more. Jack used to tease me. You know, he'd say, if you charged people what your work is actually worth, you'd retire 10 years earlier. I'd tell him the same thing every time. If they could afford full price, they wouldn't be bringing it to me. He'd shake his head and laugh. You'll never learn. Maybe he was right. Or maybe we simply measured success differently. A car door slammed across the street. I looked up. A silver sedan had pulled into the nursing home's circular driveway. A woman stepped out carrying a bouquet of white lilies. She hurried inside without anyone stopping her. No questions. No hesitation. I glanced down at my oil-stained sleeves. Funny. Flowers opened doors. Grease stains closed them. I was about to stand up and leave when the front entrance burst open. A young nurse came running outside. She looked around frantically until her eyes landed on me. Mr. Reed. I stood. Yes. She was breathing hard, like she'd sprinted through the entire building. Oh, thank goodness. She paused to catch her breath. Mr. Harrison, just found out you were turned away. Her face turned pale. And he's demanding to see the director. I followed the nurse back inside. This time, no one tried to stop me. The same security guard who had blocked the entrance only minutes earlier stepped aside without saying a word. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor. The lobby felt completely different now. The peaceful music was still playing. Families were still sitting in the lounge. But the atmosphere had changed. People were whispering. Several employees hurried down the hallway toward the rehabilitation wing. Something was happening. The young nurse slowed her pace. I'm sorry about what happened, she said quietly. I should have spoken up. You don't owe me an apology. Maybe not. She looked down. But I knew Mr. Harrison was waiting for someone important. She hesitated. I just didn't realize. Didn't realize what? That it was you. Before I could ask what she meant, raised voices echoed from the end of the corridor. One belonged to the director. The other. Even after nearly 50 years, I'd recognize that voice anywhere. It was weaker than I remembered. Slower. But it still carried the same stubborn determination. When I reached the rehabilitation lounge, the room had gone completely silent. Jack sat in his wheelchair near the window. His left hand rested on the armrest. His right hand trembled slightly from the stroke. Standing in front of him was Karen Mitchell. For the first time since we'd met, her confident smile was gone. Jack. She tried to speak calmly. We were only following protocol. Jack slowly raised his head. Protocol. The single word came out rough, but perfectly clear. You threw out Tom. Every sentence required effort. Every breath seemed to cost him something. Yet he never looked away from her. Karen folded her hands. There was a misunderstanding. No. Jack shook his head. There wasn't. He pointed toward the lobby. You judged him. The room remained silent. Even the nurses had stopped moving. I took one step inside. Jack noticed me immediately. His face changed. The anger disappeared. A wide smile spread across it. There you are. I smiled back. Sorry I'm late. He chuckled. You, always late. A few people in the room laughed quietly. It was such an ordinary joke. Exactly the kind we'd been making for decades. Jack motioned for me to come closer. As I did, he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. I waited. I know. They said you left. I almost did. He looked at Karen again. No more. The director tried once more. Mr. Harrison, please allow me to explain. Jack lifted one trembling finger. No. His eyes narrowed. You listen. The room became so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I chose this place. Karen nodded quickly. Yes, and we're grateful. I paid for this place. She blinked. I'm sorry. I paid. She frowned, clearly confused. I don't understand. One of the older nurses quietly stepped forward. I think he means the Harrison Foundation. Karen looked at her. The foundation that funded the East Wing renovation? The nurse nodded. And the rehabilitation center. And the memory care garden. Karen stared back at Jack. You founded the Harrison Foundation? Jack gave a slow nod. 30 years earlier, after selling his construction company, he'd created the foundation with one simple goal: to improve the lives of retired firefighters, police officers, and elderly people who had no family left. He never allowed his own name on buildings. Never posed for photographs. Never attended ribbon-cutting ceremonies. If people thanked him, he usually changed the subject. Most of the staff had no idea the quiet old man in room 214 was the same person whose donations had transformed the entire facility. Karen looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath her. I had no idea. Jack answered without raising his voice. That's the problem. She swallowed. I judged someone without knowing who he was. Jack slowly shook his head. No. His words came sharper now. You judged him because you thought you did. No one spoke. Not the nurses. Not the visitors. Not even me. Because we all knew he was right. Karen looked at me. Then back at Jack. I'm deeply sorry. Jack leaned back in his chair. His breathing had become heavier. But before anyone could end the conversation, he looked at me and smiled again. Tom. Yeah. Take me outside. I frowned. Outside. He nodded. I've got something to show everyone. For a moment, I thought he meant the garden. Someplace quiet. Somewhere the two of us could sit like we had every Sunday for years. Then Jack pointed toward the lobby. No. He took a slow breath. There. The director immediately stepped forward. Mr. Harrison, I really don't think that's a good idea. Jack looked at her. It wasn't a good idea. He paused to catch his breath. To throw him out either. No one argued after that. Two nurses carefully unlocked the wheels on his chair. I placed a hand on the handles. Together, we slowly made our way toward the front lobby. Word traveled faster than we did. By the time we reached the entrance, nearly every employee in the building had gathered nearby. Receptionists, nurses, maintenance workers, visitors, families. Even the security guard who had stopped me earlier stood silently against the wall. Karen looked increasingly uncomfortable. Everyone, please return to your duties. No one moved. Jack raised one finger. They stay. The room fell completely silent. He looked around at the faces surrounding him. Some were curious. Some looked embarrassed. Others simply seemed confused. Then his eyes found the security guard. "What is your name?" The young man swallowed. "Daniel, sir." Jack nodded. "Did you decide to stop my friend?" Daniel shook his head immediately. "No, sir. I was told to." Jack turned toward Karen. "So?" Another long breath. "Whose decision was it?" Karen closed her eyes for a moment. "It was mine." No one spoke. She looked around the lobby before continuing. "I believed." Her voice trembled for the first time. That Mr. Reed wasn't the kind of visitor we wanted walking through the building. Jack stared at her. "And what kind was that?" She couldn't answer. Finally she whispered, "I thought he would make people uncomfortable." Jack slowly turned toward the visitors gathered nearby. "I've known Tom." He smiled. 48 years. He carried children out of burning buildings. He worked double shifts so widows could afford to fix their tractors. He never walked away from anyone who needed help. His breathing became heavier. A nurse stepped closer, worried. Jack gently waved her back. "I'm not finished." He looked directly at Karen. "You saw old boots. You saw grease. You saw worn clothes." He shook his head. "You never saw the man." The words hung in the air. No one dared interrupt. Then an elderly woman sitting near the fireplace slowly raised her hand. "I saw what happened." Everyone turned toward her. "My husband lives here." She looked at Karen. "I wanted to say something." She lowered her eyes. "But I was afraid." A middle-aged man standing beside her spoke next. "My father asked me last month why some visitors are treated differently. I thought he was imagining things." He looked around the lobby. Maybe he wasn't. One voice became two. Two became five. Families began sharing stories. A delivery driver who had been told to use the back entrance because he looked out of place. A granddaughter mistaken for housekeeping because she wore supermarket clothes after work. An elderly veteran whose old army jacket had prompted suspicious looks every time he visited his brother. Each story sounded different. Each ended the same way. Someone had been judged before anyone bothered to know them. Karen's face had gone completely pale. She looked around the room as if hearing these stories for the first time. She stopped. There was nothing left to defend. Just then, the front doors opened. 3 men and a woman walked inside. All wore dark business suits. One of the nurses whispered, "The board." Karen's shoulders stiffened. The chairman approached Jack first. "Mr. Harrison." Jack nodded politely. "I didn't expect to see you here today. I asked them to come." The chairman glanced around the silent lobby. "I understand something serious has happened." Jack looked at me, then back at the board. "It has." He slowly lifted one trembling hand and pointed toward me. "This man." His voice cracked. "Is the reason I'm alive." Everyone listened. 48 years ago. He ran into a fire to save a child. I went after him. We both made it out. He smiled faintly. Because brothers don't leave each other. He looked directly at the chairman. "If this building." He paused again. "Can't welcome a man like Tom, then it doesn't deserve my name or my foundation." The words landed like a hammer. The chairman's expression changed instantly. He slowly turned toward Karen, then back to Jack. "I give you my word." His voice was calm. "This will be addressed." Jack finally leaned back in his wheelchair. For the first time since I'd arrived, the tension left his face. He looked up at me and smiled. "Told you." "What?" He chuckled softly. "I'd get you inside." The entire lobby laughed. Even I couldn't help smiling. But looking at the faces around us, I realized something. The story wasn't over. It was only beginning. The board didn't wait until the following week. They didn't schedule another meeting. They handled everything that same afternoon. Karen Mitchell was asked to step into the conference room with the chairman and the other board members. No one knew exactly what was said behind those closed doors. But nearly an hour later, the chairman returned alone. He walked directly toward Jack. Then, without the slightest hesitation, he extended his hand. "Mr. Harrison, I owe you an apology." Jack looked at the hand for a moment before shaking it. The chairman continued, "You trusted us with this place. And today, we failed that trust." He turned toward the employees gathered in the lobby. Effective immediately, Karen Mitchell has been relieved of her duties as executive director. A quiet murmur spread through the room. The chairman wasn't finished. "We will also begin an independent review of every complaint involving visitors over the past 5 years." Several employees exchanged uneasy glances. Anyone found treating residents or their families with disrespect will no longer work here. For the first time all afternoon, it felt as though someone was finally listening. The investigation lasted several weeks. What they discovered surprised everyone. Or perhaps, it should have surprised no one. Families described being judged by their clothes. Visitors spoke about being ignored while wealthier-looking guests were welcomed with smiles. One elderly man admitted he had stopped inviting his old friends because he couldn't bear watching them feel embarrassed at the front desk. The problem had never been one bad decision. It had become part of the culture. By the time the investigation ended, 3 managers had been dismissed. Several policies were rewritten. Every employee, from the receptionist to senior administrators, completed mandatory training focused on dignity, respect, and unconscious bias. A new sentence appeared on the wall behind the reception desk. It wasn't long, but everyone who entered the building could read it. Respect should never depend on appearance. Jack smiled the first time he saw it. "Now," he chuckled, "they're learning." Life slowly returned to normal. Every Sunday, I brought apple fritters. Every Sunday, Jack pretended he only wanted one. Every Sunday, he somehow managed to eat 2. Some habits never change. His speech improved little by little. He still struggled with certain words. But his laugh sounded exactly the same as it had 50 years earlier. Sometimes we'd sit in the garden for hours without saying much. We didn't need to. After nearly half a century of friendship, silence had become its own conversation. One afternoon, he reached into the pocket of his blanket and pulled out the old photograph. The one of 2 young firefighters standing in front of Engine 7. He studied it for a long time. Then handed it to me. "You keep it." I smiled. "No. It belongs with you." He shook his head. "It belongs." He pointed from the picture. "To me." Then to himself. "With us." I slipped it carefully into my wallet. I've carried it there ever since. Jack passed away the following spring. I was sitting beside his bed. Just the 2 of us. Exactly the way he'd wanted. A few minutes before the end, he opened his eyes one last time. "You came." I laughed softly. "When have I ever missed a Sunday?" A faint smile crossed his face. Then, with all the strength he had left, he whispered 4 words. "Thanks for showing up." Those were the last words my best friend ever spoke. Sometimes I still hear them. especially on Sundays. A month after the funeral, I visited Maple Grove again. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. The young security guard recognized me immediately. He smiled before I even reached the door. "Good morning, Mr. Reed." No one stopped me. No one questioned me. The receptionist greeted me by name. One of the nurses waved from down the hallway. It wasn't because anyone knew who Jack had been, or because they knew anything about me. It was because the culture inside those walls had finally changed. And that mattered far more. Before leaving, I stopped in the lobby. I looked at the sentence hanging behind the reception desk. Respect should never depend on appearance. I stood there for a moment, thinking about the day I had been turned away because of a grease-stained jacket and a pair of worn-out boots. Funny how quickly people can judge a stranger. Even funnier how rarely they question those judgments afterward. Jack spent his life building homes, businesses, and charities. But I think his greatest achievement happened on the day he could barely stand. Because that was the day he reminded an entire building that kindness isn't something you offer after learning who a person is. It's something you offer before. So let me ask you something. If someone judged you the moment they saw your clothes, your car, or your job, would you forgive them after they apologized? Or would that first impression be impossible to forget?